Hello and welcome to Leader Insights, the Trailblazer Leadership Lab. Today, I know, it's a mouthful, but today we're going to have a conversation about inclusive leadership. And we have a special guest. Ashanti is here with me today, and I cannot hide my excitement. So yes, I'm very excited to have her here talking about inclusive leadership. And you will learn why in a little bit. So this will be an engaging and interesting conversation. So, Ashanti, tell me a little about you.
Well, as you know, my name is Ashanti. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I work there now, and I've been in education for about 15 years.
Fantastic. And so, Ashanti and I are going to engage in an honest conversation about inclusive leadership. And it's going to be interesting because I think we both have very different perspectives of kind of inclusion looks like and what it is. And I'm going to be asking a few questions. Ashanti will be responding. I'm sure she'll probably be challenging some of my questions, which I'm excited about. And we want to learn all about inclusion from maybe two perspectives. So I believe that inclusion is a misunderstood concept. I think there's a lot of buzzwords about inclusion, diversity, and belonging. And I am from the perspective that inclusion should always equal belonging, but it doesn't always work that way. But I also think that inclusion is misinterpreted and confused with diversity, which are two very different things. So I want us to engage in a conversation about what real inclusion looks like. And so we're going to challenge a little bit the status quo, share our perspectives, and potentially give you guys an opportunity to be curious about inclusion and look at how you can include that in your daily practices.
Okay.
Shanti. I'm going to cheat because I'm going to have my notes. What do you think real inclusion is?
I think real inclusion is really like a space. Inclusion is a space where people with different perspectives, different walks of life, different backgrounds feel comfortable to share their perspective on something and work together to come to a better outcome or conclusion.
I agree.
See, you get to cheat. You have notes. I don't have.
I know. But I do. I actually agree with that. So I'm going to ask you a question about leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership from the perspective of how do we need to challenge leadership practices that cause barriers to inclusion? Have you had some of those experiences yourself or as a leader in your field? Have you seen it from other people?
Yeah, of course. I think there are many leadership styles that could cause barriers to inclusion, and I don't think that they're always intentional. I think there are some decisions that just need to be made, whether it's because of a deadline, there's an emergency, or there's a lack of trust on the leader's part for the input of other people to help make this decision. I think when we're in those situations, we know that there might not be the space for inclusion in decision making. I think people in work environments might not fully understand that. And when those moments happen where a leader is making a decision that doesn't really have an inclusive feel to it, people might take that personally or take that as might define the leader with that one situation versus being able to step away from it and think about why that decision was made in that way.
That actually brings me to a great question. A lot of leaders don't necessarily talk about the why when they're making a lot of these decisions. What's your take on leadership being transparent enough to explain the why in these moments? And do you think it can play a positive role in building an inclusive environment?
Absolutely. I think the more that people know about the why, the less they have to make up. I think a lot of jumping to conclusions and rumors, if you will, that comes from lack of knowledge. And when someone is aware, or a group of people in this sense are aware of the why, then it leaves less space for false realities to exist in people's minds. Not to negate the fact that there are times when leaders must just make decisions. I don't think that they're often. I don't think that they should be a way of leading, but I definitely can acknowledge that they exist and they come up.
They do. Tell me a little bit about what do you think are some of the hidden biases that show up that may cause barriers to inclusion? As a person coming into an environment. Biases like prejudices.
I mean, I know what biases mean, but what do you mean by the hidden biases that show up?
Like, we all come up with preconceived notions of what we think it's right and wrong.
Of course.
we may interpret someone's behavior. And I think because of the lack of understanding the why, but also biases that we culturally may already have that may create a barrier. So my question is, how do you think that may affect our ability individually, right, as leaders, if we're not aware, right? How can that show up in the workplace?
I think we all have biases that impact the way we feel about other people or things, and whether you're a leader or not, that shows up. And so I think we need to do is just be aware that it exists. Once you are aware that your bias exists, then you know either how to be reflective in a situation, because you might not always be able to be proactive and check it, right? So yeah, bias comes up. Are you a reflective enough leader to go back to that person or to that scenario or that group of people and say, hey, so I wasn't my best self in this moment. Let's go back to this conversation and show them that you are someone who knows mistakes are made and we learn from them and we move forward. I think hidden biases come up at any time. I think you might have someone who doesn't speak English walk into your office wanting to enroll a student, and now you're looking on how to translate and you get frustrated. Oh my God, this is stuff, right? But that is the work. So that your bias comes up in that moment of frustration, because if it didn't, you wouldn't be frustrated. You'd be ready to greet that person and support them in their needs regardless. But those moments happen, and then just knowing when to be reflective about it and when to check yourself. Any leader who wants to be effective, especially when it comes to inclusive practices, needs to be aware of their own biases and what their next steps will be when they discover that they've shown up in the workplace. They're not going to go away, right? But how do you handle and manage them?
And I think that brings me to a really important question about the tactics of inclusion, right? So inclusion is not a soft skill, in my personal opinion. I think inclusion is something that we do intentionally. So I think there's a lot of thought behind that. What are some of the things that you do to ensure that the voices of the people you work with are heard?
So as someone who leads many teams in my work, I think something I personally thrive on, just because I feel like I make better decisions that way, is hearing the perspective of others. So when I am trying to figure out something with a specific team, I have team meetings. We are all sitting down. We have protocols for who's speaking and who's sharing, and we all get a chance to have our voices heard. Come to group consensus when we are deciding on something. We all have a different role and responsibility in making that thing happen. And so it seems small, and it seems, oh, you have a protocol for your team meeting. Right, yes, because it's a way that ensures that everyone's voice is heard, that everyone's opinion is valued, and that we come to some sort of agreement. And it might not meet everyone's 100%, but we all have a piece of it that we feel matters. And then we all have a role in making it happen. And so inclusion kind of happens inevitably when your perspective is heard and taken into account, and then you are partly responsible for bringing something to life.
I really like that response, because I think sometimes we think of inclusion as something that it's very hard. And sometimes it can be when you're challenging the status quo, right? Yeah. And uncomfortable things come up because someone said something that may not need the cultural background of someone, or the religious background of someone, or just the belief system of another person. So I think being able to have that thought process very ingrained and intentional, it's really important. I also like what you said, a meeting protocol. I've never really heard that term before. I know that in meetings people have guidelines and boundaries that people shouldn't cross, and right, like the meeting norms. Yeah, but it's really about mediating the conversation, not necessarily focused on what you just said. Is I have a meeting protocol so that every voice is heard.
Yeah, can't own that. I come from a school that was led by someone who had protocols for everything.
That's
and
great.
For someone like me, I value that. That works for me. It gives me a clear outline of what needs to happen. So that's something that I've carried with me. Everybody doesn't love the team protocol. And then things like inclusion, you kind of fall to the wayside because protocols are built to ensure certain things are taking place.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. I think it just reminds me that leadership, it's a learning engagement. It's it's something that you amend every day with every practice and everything that you do. So thank you for sharing that nugget. I think it's something that we could all take away with. I want to ask you a question that we were debating earlier today on belonging. Yes. So I like to use the word belonging. I a bit of a mush when it comes to people, and we have a bit of a different perspective. So tell me about.
I don't know if we have a different perspective.
I mean, it's different, right? Because just to give you guys some context, I come from the premise that the only thing that we should be doing with people emotionally and how we approach the life experience of people is by simply choosing to love every person that comes to us. And I think you saw the fix, right? So you believe that the only experience that rings true for me, I can only speak for me, is that I must love every single human, spite what they say, do, or think, right? And I don't have to agree with it. When I come from that space, it allows me to keep an open mind. That's not to say that people can't come from other perspectives or choose to do that differently. But I think it takes people back when I say those things out loud, because I truly feel that way. Now, I also believe that inclusion should equal someone feeling like they belong to a space. Now, they don't always have to go hand in hand because, like you said, there's so many different things happening in the world and in the experience of every individual. But I liked what you said about, inclusion doesn't necessarily have to be about love or belonging. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
I mean, I don't know about the love unless you're defining love in the most basic sense of like just caring about another person.
Yes. We must care about every person. You are absolutely correct.
Love and what did you say?
Love and the sense of belonging. Like, I think you were talking about, look, I don't have to like anybody to create a space of inclusion. And you were talking about that piece where, it's not personal.
Well, I don't have to love you to include you. Inclusion is literally including others, right? What I need is to have the most well-rounded solution to a problem or the most comprehensive XYZ that you're trying to create, right? And in my opinion, that comes from diverse perspectives. And so I don't need to love you or like you or hang out with you or talk to you often to value your perspective on something, to invite you to the table to help come to a better situation, right? And so that's what I mean by I don't think it has to be this warm, fuzzy love thing. But in a way, that is love, right? Caring about someone else's perspective. I care about how something impacts another person enough to include them in the process so that it doesn't have a negative impact on them. I just don't call it love. I don't know what I call it.
And you know what? And I think it's important for people, again, we do this because we want different perspectives to show up because it may resonate. What you just said may resonate with a whole different group of people.
Yeah, I would never call it love, but you have no problem calling it love.
I do. I think it's love. I don't know what other emotion matters. I like anger sometimes.
Oh, God.
Anger is good. Well, we have to get angry. We process things in that way. So I think emotions are important. I guess, after the facts, when I've learned something from it, I think I do appreciate it.
What if you just be mad?
No, I don't do that. I can't be mad. It's a waste of time. It's hard to be mad.
You don't know if you're going to learn something from anger until the end, but you've already been angry. Yeah. You can't say I don't do that.
No, as in, I don't think that I have an emotion about anger. If it comes up, I own it. I'm pissed off.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's about that self-regulation space where we want to... Because anger can create not so great inclusive environments. It could get you fired. It could totally get a lot of stuff going on. And as leaders, I think one of the things that I tell you all the time is consistency is one of the most valuable leadership traits. People should know who they're getting every day. There may be an outlier because we're human and we make mistakes, but I think that's also about thinking about how do you include people in who you are as a person so that they can have an understanding of who we are as people as well, because we are making a lot of decisions all the time. Mm-hmm. So let me talk there's something else that we talked about earlier as we prepared for this conversation, and we talked about the political environment and how the current political environment, it's affecting a little bit of that inclusion, well, maybe a lot of the inclusion piece. And you mentioned a couple of things that are happening globally that have shifted the inclusion from the female perspective. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. Oh my God. You put it in your back pocket. Well, we were talking about...
You said from the female perspective.
Well, yes, we were talking about how women no longer have a choice in making decisions about their body.
But I don't know how that impacts the workplace.
and we talked about that. And I said to you, well, it kind of does, because what if you have an educator that comes to you with a concern about an unexpected pregnancy and not being able to have that? And we live in New York. So in New York, we don't have this big issues about, but remember, workspaces are social spaces.
I don't know.
too.
Are you talking about from a leader or a colleague?
From
Because
a
I
leader
don't know
perspective-
that someone would sit down with their supervisor and be like, oh, I really need to have this abortion, but I can't.
No, I think from both. I think from a leadership stance, if you have a really good relationship with your leader,
Mm-hmm.
they may come to you because you are a person that they respect and trust their opinion, right? Leaders are a resource to people, right? And maybe it's embarrassing. Maybe they talk to a colleague.
Yeah.
But it changes the dynamics of the work environment when someone is going through something very, very
Well,
different.
yes.
Right? And so how do we include actual life things that are happening to people? How do we manage those? What kind of level of care and understanding do we, without crossing boundaries, right? But remember, we're human. We don't leave our humanity at the door as much as we try. We just can't. It's hard. Yeah.
I mean, I agree it's hard. I just think it is not something to be done lightly. And so I don't want to kind of give suggestions or recommendations on how to handle. I mean,
that's why
if
we
we're
have an
talking
HR
about
department.
political,
Let's be honest, right? We have an HR department that helps people. But I think part of that conversation, if you don't feel comfortable as a leader, because it might cross one of your personal boundaries, right?
Right.
And what do you do next?
I think when we think about like global issues, political issues, I think it'd be very hard pressed to find someone who with you coming to their leader about it. But if they do, I think you have to speak from a very honest place. While also comforting to that person's situation and giving them the best support that you know how, a resource or another person. But I think it is a very tricky space to introduce your personal beliefs and ideologies onto the entire group of people that you work with.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of protecting and creating a safe space, right? For yourself and for others. People share what they feel comfortable sharing in, as long as the space allows for that experience. And, I've been in places where there have been activities where I'm like, I cannot believe we're doing this here. And people have exposed serious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you do with that trauma after? Mm-hmm. Now, we've been very inclusive. Everybody said whatever the heck came out of their brain and they've put it all out. But there are repercussions,
of course,
to being that transparent.
Yeah.
And how do we then...
Well, you have to be ready to manage it. Well,
correct. And I think I wanted to bring that because I had an experience of that sort where it was chaos. And I wasn't responsible for the chaos, but I ended up having to manage that chaos. And I think it's real. And then respecting the boundaries about confidentiality and making sure that people feel like that this was an outlayer of an experience. And so inclusion can go really right or really wrong. And so be mindful that,
think of the ways in which you create inclusive spaces.
Well, right. We have to be very intentional how we do that. And I think you said something to me as we prepare for this, like, what is the goal of the conversation, right? And I was like, well, I think the goal for us here today is just to give you a perspective on inclusion. There's no right or wrong. It's really, who are you in that process? Because I do believe that inclusion happens in the small moments, when you least expect it. For someone to feel like they've been heard and included. It's what we do. I do believe it's a behavior. So, Ashanti, what do you think from all the things that you've learned and the exposure that you've had, and you've been blessed enough to get really good exposure. Like, I feel like you've been, you're a person that has had the opportunity to work with an array of different people and just best practices. And I'm a little biased because I do believe that happens most of the time in our education places where we're in this constant window of learning, that things may come up and we're servicing the most vulnerable population. What is the one thing that you would qualify as leadership traits that support inclusion?
One thing?
One or two or three. A few things that you think, are...
One thing, one or two or three, or a list.
Or just give it to me. Give me a whole paragraph.
The traits that
a leader should have, right? Should their toolbox to inclusive, to have a leadership of inclusion.
I think a leader would need to be open-minded.
Okay, that's one.
Flexible.
I've had to learn to be flexible. So yes, I agree.
Honest.
Honesty is a big one.
And I don't necessarily say transparent. I'm honest. Honest about who you are. Honest about your boundaries. Honest about what you know and what you don't know. Just honest. I mean, and I think you have to be positive. You have to have good intentions. You have to want the best for the person across the table from you, the best for the organization that you're working at, the best for the people who are receiving your service or buying your product. You have to be positive. You have to want the best for ... Whenever you're coming into a space as a leader and you're open-minded, you're flexible, you're honest, and you want the best for the other the person on the other side of the table, then I think inclusion will just kind of happen naturally. And when you're in a scenario where you're like, I don't care, like you don't really want the best, but you don't want the best, like you're just indifferent, you need to kind of figure out, and maybe that's not a space for you to be, and maybe that's when your leadership, right, is also knowing what's for you and what's not for you, and you tap somebody else in for that. Someone else that you trust, someone else that you know is effective at this, right? I'm very indifferent about this moment right here. I'm going to have you see Antonio. I'm not going to tell you I'm indifferent, right? But I know. I really kind of don't think that this is for me. Antonio's good with this. Go talk to Antonio, right? And that's my resource. That's my caring for you. I'm going to send you to the right person because I know that this is not for me. I think, be honest, and we have to have best intentions.
And you know what? I think when you're honest, you're authentic, right? And I think when you go into this pretend place, I'm not a believer of, fake it till you make it. People use that all the time, and I'm just not a fan of that.
I don't know that it actually works.
And I don't know that it works either. I think you can through the lack of authenticity and honesty when that's happening. So I align with that level of honesty. And I wanted to throw a couple of other traits that I think go hand in hand with what Ashanti shared, which is vulnerability.
Your notes say.
I know I have notes. I cheat. But I think vulnerability. Humility. Knowing... Again, it's part of that honesty, knowing when you got it and when you don't got it, and being humble about it. And I think humility also allows you to listen with honesty. Meet the needs of people. You've said that a lot. And then being authentic. Yeah. I think they all are really the same type of...
Connected in a way.
Yeah, they're very connected. So I wanted to kind of add those. I think, we're coming to our closing and our reflection. So Ashanti... any final thoughts? If there was one or two things, box you into one thing.
Me giving final thoughts. This is your show.
No, it's not a show. This is a lab, a learning lab, conversation, a dialogue. All right. Now, maybe someday it'll be a show. But now, what is the one? If you were to tell your younger self something about leadership, something that you're like, oh man. Or it could be something that someone told you and you're like, oh, yeah. What would you tell people who are... And leadership has no age, right? You can be an infant leader and it doesn't matter the age that you are. You may just be stepping into leadership. An infant leader where you're just
kind of young, new to it?
New to the field, new to the concept of leadership,
like that,
right? You don't like it?
No,
okay.
Infant leader. That's weird.
Or you can be a super senior leader, right? But there's
I don't think we should just use age references.
Well, I think it's important because I think people think that leadership has an age. I think people think leadership's attached to age, and I don't believe that. I think you can be a 20-year-old and be an amazing leader and have amazing contributions. Children, we see children being leaders in their classrooms.
I agree.
And they just got here, but children teach us things, right? So that's kind of what I'm saying. It's I don't believe leadership has an age, but I think for those who are entering into that space, and one of those things that you You're like, you should miss, or I think this has to be, or whatever.
You should know, I'm laughing because this was my biggest thing, that people matter. It sounds very basic to the work, but
it's not basic.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the work, at least that I do, that you do.
Oh yeah.
People matter. And I don't think it matters how good you are at a system, how fast you are, effective you are, how many numbers you can get, what your percentages are. If you are leading people, you have to understand that a big part of your work is the people, is managing and supporting and relating to others. And those relationships where you're building trust and maintaining trust so that you can have inclusive environments where people are vulnerable and honest and sharing their perspective or challenging the status quo. You only get to that space when you trust that you're in a safe space with a person who's not going to it's not going to backfire on you. So relationships matter, but people matter.
Okay. I appreciate that. It ties beautifully to our first podcast on psychological safety and building safe spaces. And I think ultimately it goes right back to that theme, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of making spaces safe for people to connect. And I want to say that leaders create their environments
Absolutely.
in which people feel in that way, whether it's an effective environment or not. We are ultimately responsible. So I have some closing thoughts that I want to share with you as we come to a close. And, I want to ask you, who is missing from the table in your leadership conversations, and who will you bring in? The other thing is, I encourage you to think about the different perspectives of different groups in your spaces and in your environment. And if you don't have different people in your spaces, how do you bring that into your space so that you can begin to listen? Because in the absence of different perspectives, it's very complex to come up with, and you said it very, very clearly, it's very hard to come up with the best possible solution. And I think that's really important. So making waves here, it's really important. You got to challenge people to use their voice and maybe have a protocol. I think it's really important. So shifting that's super, super important. And I have a few takeaways that are going to fall right into what Ashanti was talking about, which is inclusion is a leadership behavior. Say that again. Inclusion is a leadership behavior. Inclusion requires courage. You agree?
Sure.
What?
I don't think it's that hard.
But it is. Some people are afraid to speak. I know, but some people are afraid
courage
to speak.
for the participant, not courage for the leader.
Correct. For the participant.
Yes, absolutely.
You have to have courage. There's, it's about unlearning your privilege and power dynamics. You have to be courageous as a leader to say, yes, I have privilege. No, I will not use it for the bad, only for good, right? So I think that's really important. Understanding that power holds nothing. Power holds nothing. The only thing that is important here is that as leaders, our job is to hold meaning, not power. So I think understanding those dynamics, and of course celebrating diversity, right? Different from inclusion, but necessary for all of the multiple perspectives that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Inclusion happens in micro moments. And I'll give you an example. Who's speaking? Who's interrupting? And who gets credit? Who gets heard? We need to be disruptors in this world to create inclusion. So I want you to sit with that, because I think that's a big one for me. We're so in our heads about wanting to be right. Sometimes. And we have to let that go. Good leaders, just listen. Even if you're right in your head, just keep it in your head. You don't have to say it. You can always go back to a private conversation with people, preserve their dignity, right? They will respect you more for that. So remember that. Inclusion happens in micro moments. Leaders model inclusion. Goes back what you were saying. People actually matter, and you have to model that inclusion. So if people don't feel included, or if people feel included, it's not by accident. It is something that we do very intentionally. So it is important to cultivate the intention. So my call to action is, yes, thank you. Who are you going to bring next into your table? Who are you inviting that you know you've not given an opportunity to be heard or have a voice? And my reflection is, if you haven't brought people to the table that should be, why haven't you? Because a lot of it is about who you are. It's about you. What's the fear? What's the hesitation? What's the barrier? Why haven't you done that? So take a couple of minutes to write those names down. Even if it's a community, right? Even communities. Why haven't you been able to include them so that you can have all of whose perspective have you overlooked? That can make you a better leader, that could make your environment better. I think that's super important. And last but not least, make sure to continue to do great things and to be humble and to ask for support and to have meaningful conversations. And I'm going to close it with Ashanti's words. People matter. And if there's anything that you take away from this conversation is that people do matter, whether you like them or not, right? So once again, thank you for joining us. This is Leader Insights, Trailblazer Leadership Lab.
That is long.
But I love it. Sorry, I love it. I know it's a mouthful. But again, find us on the web, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, whatever apps you have. All the things. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for having me.
You've been amazing.
So have you. I just did that.
Thank you. All right, guys. Thank you.